Big Daddy Dalio, he's back. And this time he's warning of a revolution if we don't fix capitalism. So he released an article, Why and How Capitalism Needs to be Reformed. Now we call Dalio Big Daddy Dalio for a number of reasons. It's not only because he's worth almost $17 billion. It's not only because he runs the most successful hedge fund of all time, Bridgewater, but it's also because now he's doing stuff like this. He is working overtime to share all the knowledge he has before his time is up. The guy is 69 years old. He's getting up there. And honestly, when I first found Dalio, after I was reading his stuff, I was thinking, why isn't our government and the Federal Reserve going directly to him to figure out how to fix our economy if we get into trouble? Are we doing things right? Dalio has an understanding of economies and markets and people way deeper than anybody else in the world. And if you need proof, just look at his hedge fund. They've monetized it pretty damn well. So it's great that he's coming out with all this stuff, all these books, all these talks. He's really trying to push these ideas out there. So this is a pretty long article. He did it in two parts. First part is outlining the problem, and the second part is his diagnosis of it and some suggestions to fix it. So in this video, we're going to go over part 1 and explain what the problem actually is. Then I'll make another video going over part 2, which is how to fix it. So Dalio starts out saying that over the many years that he's been in markets and doing his thing, he's seen capitalism evolve in a way that's not working well for the majority of Americans because it's producing self-reinforcing spirals up for the haves and down for the have-nots. Basically, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, which is not how capitalism is supposed to work. This is creating widening income, wealth, and opportunity gaps that pose existential threats to the United States, because these gaps are bringing about damaging domestic and international conflicts and weakening America's condition. So we've talked about this previously in previous Dalio videos, which you should go watch. I got a whole playlist up here. Just click that link. But this wealth gap is a huge problem because this is how societies fall apart. This is how revolutions happen, like Dalio mentioned. Well, like every single headline quoted to get the clicks, just like I quoted for this video. But he says that he thinks most capitalists don't know how to divide the economic pie well, and most socialists don't know how to grow it well. So now we're at a juncture where either people of different ideological inclinations will work together to skillfully re-engineer the system so that the pie can both grow and be divided well, or if that doesn't happen, we will have a great conflict in some form of a revolution that will hurt most everyone and will shrink the pie. Let's go with option A, yeah? I believe that all good things taken to an extreme can be self-destructive and that everything must evolve or die. This is now true for capitalism. So part 1, what is the problem? Is this a real problem? Dalio starts out talking about where he comes from, like he grew up in a middle-class family, raised by good parents, went to decent schools. He basically lived the American dream. So he's puts that out there up front. You know, his conditions were good compared to a lot of people that don't have that same upbringing. So he makes that clear up front. So in all his years of studying and making money in these markets, he has found that capitalism is the best option for an economy. Obviously, he's biased because, you know, he's done really well with capitalism, but he gives a good description of why. He says that the ability to make money and save it and put it into capital, i.e. capitalism, is an effective motivator of people and allocator of resources that raises people's living standards. It's effective at motivating people because it rewards people for their productive activities with money that can be used to buy whatever they want. And it's an effective allocator of resources because profits require that you're providing value to someone, right? And to create a profit, you need to provide more value than what it costs resource-wise going into creating whatever you're making. So it's a natural system that rewards figuring that out. Love capitalism. Being productive leads people to make money, which leads them to acquire capital, which is their savings and investment vehicles. Yeah, not everyone is starting a business, but if you're working at a company and you're saving money, like say even in your 401k, that's going into the public market, into stocks. It's going into the system that supports capital for people. It's all about investing. So this both protects the saver by providing money when it is later needed, and it provides those capital resources to those who can combine them with their ideas and convert them into the profits and productivities that raise our living standards. That is the capitalist system. So it's supposed to be win-win, right? You as a saver, you're taking your money and investing it into people that are going to take that money and produce value for the economy. So you get a return on your savings, and those people make money too because they can launch their products with that investment capital. Both parties win, economy grows bigger, pie grows bigger. Over the many years, he's seen communism come and go, and it doesn't work. The way that the economies work well is if they have some bit of capitalism in them, even communist China. The communist philosophy of from each according according to his ability, to each according to his needs, turned out to be naive because people were not motivated to work hard if they weren't getting rewarded, because why would you, right? If all your stuff is going to get taken and redistributed anyway, what the heck, what's the point? So with communism, prosperity suffered. Capitalism, which we explained what that does, basically the opposite, that has worked much, much better. So Dalio has studied a lot, as I said, and in a nutshell, an economy and country will fail if it has poor education, a poor culture, one that impedes people from operating effectively together, poor infrastructure, and too much debt. That's going to cause bad economic results. The best results come when there's equal opportunity in education and work, good family or family-like upbringing through the high school years, civilized behavior within a system that most people believe is fair, and free and well-regulated markets for goods, services, labor, and capital, which will provide incentives, savings, and financing opportunities to most people. So he laid out what should work, right? What works with good economies. Now he's going to go into explaining why America has shifted away from a good economy and good capitalism. So he says why I believe that capitalism is not working well for most Americans. First off, he's going to show the difference that exists between the haves and have-nots. Basically, in this next section, he's showing so much data that he's collected that convinces you things are not right. I'll go through the highlights that I thought were interesting. And like I said, that data is going to show you how big this wealth disparity really is. So to show the wealth gap, he broke the economy into the top 40% of people and the bottom 60%, and they're split up by income. So first off, there has been little or no real income growth for most people for decades. Prime age workers in the bottom 60% have had no real, so inflation adjusted, that's what he means, income growth since 1980. This was at the time that the incomes for the top 10% have doubled, and those for the top 1% have tripled. So check it out, this is the bottom 60% right here with the red line. Their household income has not moved since the 80s. But look at the top 40%, it keeps going up. So of course that's going to cause a huge wealth gap. I mean, literally, you see the wealth gap on this chart. It's getting bigger and bigger versus here in the 70s versus now. So the income gap is about as high as ever, and the wealth gap is the highest since the late 1930s. Today, the wealth of the top 1% of the population is more than that of the bottom 90% combined. So basically the top 1% has more wealth to themselves than everybody else combined. So this is the same sort of wealth gap that existed during the 1935 to 1940 period that brought an era of great internal and external conflicts for most countries. World War II, anybody? Yeah, it was bad. So those in the top 40% now have on average more than 10 times as much wealth as those in the bottom 60%. This is up from 6 times in 1980. Look at this relative income. It was the highest back here in the 30s when we had World War II. Dipped down below, now it's back up there again. Not a good sign. So these charts below now show the real income growth by quintiles for the overall population since 1970. So Dalio says, ask yourself which one you're in. Whichever one you're in has probably formed your perspective. So his goal is to show you the broader perspective. And honestly, if you're watching this video, if you clicked when you saw Dalio, I mean, you probably have some money. If you know who Dalio is, you're probably investing. And the fact that you're investing puts you leagues above everyone else. If you're in a certain wealth bracket, right? If you were born and grew up a certain way, this stuff seems basic. Like, why wouldn't you be investing? But that's not how it is for everybody. There's a stat soon that's coming up. It shows how most people aren't even in the market because they don't have money. So Dalio is, writing this whole piece going at the higher level people, because these are the people, you and me included, that tend to forget how everyone else is living. And when we're in our little bubbles, we can't understand. Dalio's trying to break that bubble with facts. So the top 5%, great growth. Highest fifth, solid. The fourth, fifth, pretty good. Up third, flattening out. Second, flattening. Lowest fifth, super flat. So this is once again reiterating that the top income earners, their income is growing. The bottom, though, it's not. Most people in the bottom 60% are poor. Only about a third of the bottom of the 60% save any of their income in cash or financial assets. Only a third. So if you're not saving any money in financial assets, how are you investing? You're not. According to a recent Federal Reserve study, 40% of all Americans would struggle to raise $400. That's it, just $400 in the event of an emergency. There are no savings when you're living paycheck to paycheck. And they're not only poor, but they're stuck being poor. The chart below shows the odds of someone in the bottom quintile moving up to the middle quintile or a higher in a 10-year period. The odds declined from 23% in 1990 to only 14% in 2011. Look at this drop. So this is important because most of us think, who've had success in America, that if you work hard, you will achieve. There's good economic mobility. So the people at the bottom, they just work hard and they'll become people at the top. That's what we'd like to think, and that's what happens in a good system. But what Ray is showing is that's not happening in America. So he says, while most Americans think of the US being a country of great economic mobility and opportunity, its economic mobility rate is now one of the worst in the developed world. So US people whose fathers were in the bottom income quartile have a 40% chance of staying in that quartile, and only an 8% chance of making to the top quartile, which is half of the average probability of moving up and one of the worst probabilities of the countries analyzed. If we are really a country of equal opportunity, that shouldn't exist. So the blue line is how many people made it to the top from the bottom, and the red line is how many stayed in the bottom. So check it out, we are way low on this graph. The best countries over here, Denmark is the best. We don't have that mobility that we thought we did. One's income growth results from one's productivity growth, which results from one's personal development. So now Dalio is going to look at how we're developing people, starting with the kids. And this is the part that he hates the most. He said the most intolerable situation is how our system fails to take good care of so many of our children. A large number of them are poor, malnourished, physically and mentally, and poorly educated. The childhood poverty rate in the US is now 17.5%, and it's not meaningfully improved in decades. The domino effects of these conditions are costly. Low incomes, poorly funded schools, and weak family support for children lead to poor academic achievement, which leads to low productivity and low incomes of people who become economic burdens on the society. So it's a reinforcing loop, right? If you grow up poor, everything sucks. You don't get anything good that helps you. The schools suck. You're not even getting food. So of course, you're not going to be as productive as someone who grew up better. The US population as a whole scores very poorly relative to the rest of the developed world in standardized tests for a given education level. The US is currently around the bottom 15% of the developed world. We're not as smart as we thought, all the way down here, all these countries ahead of us. And the US has the third worst difference in shortages of teaching staff between advantaged and disadvantaged schools. We know we don't treat our teachers right, that's for sure. So this terrible education that we have in the US leads to a high percentage of students being inadequately prepared for work and having emotional problems that become manifest in damaging behaviors. Disadvantaged students in the US are far more likely to report social and/or emotional issues than in most other developed countries, including not being socially integrated at school, severe test anxiety, and low satisfaction with life. Now I tell you what, it's kind of hard to see these types of things through just reading stats, which is one of the reasons why I love film and television so much, because through film and television, the director, the actors, all that, they could really connect with you emotionally and show you what someone in a completely different walk of life is experiencing, which sure, you can read the numbers, but you're never gonna feel it. So an example of this is the show The Wire. And The Wire is this whole cop drug drama show. It's older, from HBO, and it's one of the best shows ever. They did a wonderful job with it. And in one of the seasons, they focus on children. And all this that Dalio is talking about, being socially integrated at school, emotional problems that manifest in damaging behaviors, they actually show you all of that in that show. It's a drama, but it's not too far away from the real thing. Because, you know, these are kids that they're showing you that come from completely broken homes. Parents are drug addicts, or like a lot of their dads are in jail. Some of them just don't have parents. And you see how rough it is and how difficult it is for them to actually succeed in that environment. It's actually a pretty tough season to watch, but that's what kind of gives you empathy for these types of problems, especially like when I said before, you clicked on Dalio. If you know who Dalio is, you might have a little bit of money. So you're stuck in your bubble, you have no idea how the other people live. So watching film and what these guys can put together, that kind of gives you that empathy, so you know this stuff is really happening. So now when I'm reading these stats, I'm like, yeah, it's terrible. Anyway, of course I'm going to talk about The Wire any chance I get, right? So he goes into some stats about the school. The gap in test scores between children at the top and the bottom of the income distribution is estimated to be 75% higher today than it was in the early 1940s. 75% higher, it's just growing. And the saddest part about all this is in these schools, like the inner city schools, these teachers, like, oh my God, what a rough job. And they're not supported at all. So on average, in public schools, 94% of teachers have to pay for supplies with their own money, often including basic cleaning supplies. And it's worse in the poorest public schools. And now teachers make only 68% of what other university graduates make. We know teachers don't make any money, which is significantly less than they make in other developed countries. Teachers earn 19% less than comparable workers in 2017 versus only 2% less in 1994. Teachers are getting paid less and less every year. And as Dalio explains, this wealth gap just reinforces the wealth gap. It's like a reflexive cycle. The poor are getting poorer, the rich getting richer. So Dalio says to him, leaving so many children in poverty and not educating them well is the equivalent of child abuse, and it's economically stupid. And the weakening of the family and good parental guidance has also been an important adverse influence. In 1960, 73% of children lived with two married parents who had never been divorced, and 13% lived in a household without two married parents. And he says down here the remaining 14% lived with two parents who remarried. In 2014, the share of children living in a household without two married parents was 38%. That jumped from 13%. And now less than half live in households with two parents in their first marriage. And between 91 and 2007, the number of children of the parent in state or federal prison grew 80%. Now 2.7 million children in the US have a parent in prison or jail. That's 1 in every 28 children, 3.6% of all children. Obviously, the family unit has a huge impact on how a child grows up and what they produce, whether they become productive members of society. As Dalio says, bad childcare and bad education leads to badly behaved adults, hence higher crime rates that inflict terrible costs on the society. The United States incarceration rate is nearly 5 times the average of other developed countries and 3 times that of emerging countries. If you're not taken care of, you're not going to grow up right. You're more likely to end up in jail. And the health consequences and economic costs of low education and poverty are terrible. So people in the bottom 60%, the premature deaths are up about 20% since 2000. Men from the lowest 20% of the income distribution can expect to live about 10 years fewer than men from the top 20%. Don't have money for healthcare. That's what it comes down to. And just general health, it's going to be worse if you're living in a bad part of town. Flint, Michigan, anybody? Water's still jacked up there. And Flint is one of the roughest areas in America. So all in all these things together pose an existential risk for the US, because these conditions weaken the US's economy, threaten to bring about painful and counterproductive domestic conflict, and undermine the United States' strength relative to that of global competitors. So it hurts us economically because the marginal propensity to spend of wealthy people is much less than those that don't have money. If you give a guy who already has money an extra $100, what's he gonna do with it? He already bought everything he needs, right? He'll put it into the bank. Where if you give an extra $100 to a person who's struggling, that money is gonna go straight back into the economy because they gotta use it. They need food or, whatever else. So the lower people need more money to spend. This also results in suboptimal talent development and leads to a large percentage of the population undertaking damaging activities rather than contributing activities. So people are winding up in jail or doing bad things instead of getting a job and being productive, which is a result of our terrible schooling and the way we're taking care of people. So this whole wealth gap and everything is also leading to dangerous social and political divisions that threaten our cohesive fabric and capitalism itself. So we talked about this before in a previous Dalio video. Dalio says that if there's a very big gap in the economic conditions of people who share a budget and there's an economic downturn, then there's a high risk of bad conflict, because the people that don't want money are going to want money from the people who have money. And that, when it comes to money, even in our day-to-day lives, that doesn't go so well. Disparity in wealth, especially accompanied by disparity in values, leads to increasing conflict. And in the government, that manifests itself in the form of populism of the left and populism of the right. So because of that, Dalio is pretty worried about what the next economic downturn will bring, because central banks don't have much power to reverse it, and we are in a very populist environment. And that's actually the last video we did, talking about the rise of populism and what Dalio was warning about it. If you want more on that, just go check out that playlist in that video. Both political parties are getting more and more extreme. You could see that conservatives are getting more conservative and liberals are getting more liberal. There's less cohesiveness and there's more fighting. That's populism. Dalio says it doesn't take a genius to know that when a system is producing outcomes that are so inconsistent with its goals, this is not how capitalism is supposed to work, then it needs to be reformed. So the next part, he's going to explain what he thinks should be done. And the next part, I'm going to go over in the next video, because this video is long as hell already. So if you want to see that, make sure you subscribe to this channel and smash that notification bell so you get an email notification when that video comes out. And we're publishing every single day, 7 days a week, all about markets and business, and about less somber topics than this one. I'm sorry, this one was a downer. But subscribe and you will get those videos. I'll see you in the next one. Stay fallible out there. Bye.